Thank you so much, Dr. Datta. Well, the last time I saw you was 7 years ago, and thank you for your kind words. And I certainly hope to renew our friendship at your new institution when I'm next in Delhi. I would also like to thank Professor Kumaraswamy and his institute for hosting me today. I was at JNU many years ago when he first mooted the idea of such an institute, and I've watched in amazement as it has grown over the years. Really amazing. Now, there are obviously tectonic shifts taking place in the MENA region. And here I'm not referring to the recent UAE and Bahrain normalizing relations with Israel. I think those developments are symptomatic of changing attitudes in the region amongst ordinary people. So what are these shifting attitudes? Well, we are talking about the more assertive women's movements across countries. We are talking about things like Algerian Muslims not wanting to fast in Ramadan. We are talking about growing secular values in Turkey and Iran. So rather than focusing on government policies and that of political elites, this book draws on recent World Values Survey data and examines what it means for democratization in the countries in the region. And specifically, I will come to the very important issues that Dr. Datta raised in her introduction. So one might well ask, why this emphasis on the World Values Survey? Well, the answer is simply because it covers 72 countries of the world, representing 4/5 of the world's population. And despite us, my co-author Anutash and I, drawing from the World Values Survey, we also drew data from Pew, from the Arab Barometer, from the surveys conducted by the BBC, and so forth. Now, whilst the book focuses on these macro trends, there are various country case studies which are qualitative in scope. These include Egypt, Sudan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia. In addition, there are certain thematic issues, exploring Sharia, examining the Hadith, exploring the interface between political democratization and economic growth. And this mix of the qualitative and the quantitative reflect the diverse backgrounds of my co-author, Anutash, and myself. Anutash is an Austrian political scientist, economist, and sociologist. He is extremely strong in quantitative methodology. I should say to you that I barely passed my mathematics in high school, and I am much more of a qualitative social scientist myself. I should also acknowledge that the book was written whilst I was on sabbatical and hosted at the South African Military Academy in Saldanha, which provided me with the necessary space to ensure the successful completion of the manuscript. I think the best way to describe the tone of this book is one of cautious optimism when examining prospects of democratization in the Muslim world, and specifically focusing on the MENA region. So why cautious? Because 10% of the population in Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon and Tunisia still support the likes of your Hamas, your Al-Qaeda's, your Taliban's, your Hezbollah's, and so forth. 50% or more of the population in Iraq, the Palestinian territories, Iran, Morocco, Egypt, Jordan, Algeria, and Tunisia support Sharia law. 50% or more of the population in these countries also support the death penalty for those who leave the Muslim faith. 50% or more of the population in these countries also support stoning people who commit adultery. A third of the population support honor killings of a female offender in Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinian territories. More than 20% of the population in Libya, Yemen, West Bank and Gaza, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, Algeria, Iraq, Iran, and Morocco reject having a neighbor of a different faith. Across the region, there's a distrust of public institutions such as the police and the courts. Of course, the percentage varies between countries. And all this suggests bleak prospects for democratization. And here I'm referring not only to open elections and the like, but also the underlying cultural ethos needed to sustain democratic polities. But the tone in this book also is optimistic. And I think there is reason to be hopeful. Consider the bleak long-term prospects for now Islamist political parties. These do not look good because of the values change in the Arab world as a result of processes of urbanization, modernization, and globalization facilitated by modern technology. Arab society, according to Malik Abdul Jabbar, after a thorough analysis of the latest evidence from the World Values Survey and Arab Barometer, is becoming more secular, more liberal, and egalitarian in its values, and actually moving away from religion, tradition, and ethnocentrism. In the process, Arab societies are getting more tolerant of the proverbial other, be it non-Muslims, Americans, other Westerners, or indeed even the state of Israel. Okay? And of course, issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is increasingly being pushed onto the back burner as a result of other issues, such as Iran in the region and so on. Further research conducted by other scholars demonstrate that the relationship between Muslim religiosity and democratic support need not be negative. Religiously observant Muslims constitute those who espouse a more orthodox views, attempting to create a social order and political order based on divine laws, as well as those who are more modernist in orientation and subscribe to religious pluralism and tolerance. So, whereas the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, is more inclined towards the orthodox perspective, recent survey data suggests that more Muslims in the region are adopting the modernist orientation. The Arab Youth Survey of 2019, which was conducted in 15 countries, found that 18 to 24-year-olds in the region were becoming more secular in their attitudes, blaming religion and sectarianism for the region's various conflicts. Moreover, 66% believe that religion is playing too large a role in the Middle East, while half agree that the Arab world's religious values are holding the Arab world back. Now, explaining this change in attitudes, Mohammed Sharour of the University of Damascus observed that the region's youth were confronted with a deep intellectual dilemma when it came to reconciling conservative teachings with the world they inhabit. In addition, he notes that access to the internet has allowed them to keep pace with worldwide developments, opening their minds to virtually all cultures and civilizations. Other polls, such as that conducted by BBC News Arabic, not only reinforce this trend, but also point to the implications, the political implications of it. Consider the following. When you look at the BBC polls of 25,000 people, the results demonstrated that trust in Islamist groups and organizations has fallen drastically across the MENA region. In Jordan and Morocco, trust in the Muslim Brotherhood had declined by 20% since 2012-2013. In Sudan, support for the Brotherhood had dropped by 25%, from 49% to a mere 24%. And even in Tunisia, with the reformist Ennahda, it had also declined by 24%, whilst Palestinian support for Hamas had declined to 22% from 48% over the same period. I want to specifically mention two countries where Islamists are in control, and that is Iran and Turkey. Iran claims that 99.5% of the population is Muslim. But there was a recent survey done, which was published last week in The Conversation, which found that only 40% of Iranians identified themselves as Muslim. 40%. Most Iranians believe in God, but only 37% believe in life after death, and only 30% believe in a heaven and a hell. And 20%, interestingly, said that they do not believe in God. In terms of Turkey, a Pew survey, also which just recently came out, found that only 12% of Muslims in Turkey support Sharia law as the official law in their country, whilst in a 2019 poll, a poll which took place last year, showed that Turkish youth are increasingly less religiously conservative. They are less likely to fast, pray, or if female, to cover their hair. And a poll which came out this year found that only 12% of Turks trust Islamic clerics. And this suggests to me that the Ayatollahs in Tehran, or indeed President Erdogan, is increasingly out of step with the rest of the population. So, but I speak about the various polls, and the various polls also indicate that there are many, many Muslims who desire more Islam in their public space. But they also want more democracy in their polities. And this comes out in terms of the Pew and the World Values Surveys. In other words, Muslims want both Islam and greater political freedom in their lives. And they see no contradiction between wanting more Islam and democracy. So the challenge, and I think this goes back to Dr. Shirada Datta's point at the beginning, is how do you indigenize both democracy and secularism within the Muslim world and not view it through a Eurocentric lens? In marrying the universal norms of democracy within the particular socio-cultural context that Islamic societies find themselves in, the words of Sudipta Kaviraj has resonance. The process of modernity, I quote, are universal, but these processes are realized through a trajectory of historical events which are specific to each society, unquote. So in attempting to indigenize Islamic democracy, it is instructive here to also quote the democratic theorist T.F. Rodin, and these are his words, not mine. In case of any confusion, liberal democracy does not mean American democracy. Modernization is not Westernization. The liberal in liberal democracy must be stripped of any preconceived ethnocentric notions if it is to have any analytical power in a more inclusive political science. Liberalism need not be confused with something only viable for the English-speaking world, Western Europe or Japan. It is quite okay to reject America's penchant for firearms, her lack of universal health care, or her environmental policies, and still keep basic liberal tenets like individual liberties, habeas corpus, or institutions of government other than the executive. So that's what he said. So in my remaining few minutes, let me turn to the question that Dr. Datta posed at the very beginning. So how might an Islamic democracy exist in reality? So let me start with a few caveats before I answer that question. I think the Western notion of separation between religion and the political sphere hardly exists. Let's be honest. Jürgen Habermas has pointed out that ideas of freedom, democracy, and human rights emanate from the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love, after all. Research undertaken by Jonathan Fox also proves that the so-called separation between religion and state hardly exists. Fox's survey of 152 countries proved that a full separation of religion and state only exists in one country, and according to him, that's the United States. I think in the years of Donald Trump, I doubt that even this is true. So, how can faith and democracy peacefully exist? Here I turn to the work of Stephan Linz, who proposed that what was needed was a significant degree of institutional differentiation between religion and state. This situation of differentiation is summed up as the twin tolerations. In a country that lives by these twin tolerations, religious authorities do not control democratic officials who are acting constitutionally, while democratic officials do not control religious officials, so long as these religious actors respect other citizens' rights. Many patterns of relations among the state, religion, and society are compatible with these twin tolerations. In other words, there are multiple secularisms. In my view, there have been, and I want to conclude on a more hopeful note, there has been some very interesting developments on the intellectual front happening throughout the Muslim world. In 1998, if I may recall, 50 Turkish intellectuals from different ideological persuasions came to the conclusion that God's ontological sovereignty is compatible with political sovereignty of the people. And such a position stands in sharp contrast to the Islamist position of an all-encompassing God's sovereignty over both religion and state. Also, in Iran in the 1990s, there was a group called the New Religious Thinkers. Of course, they were persecuted and so on, but their thoughts was very interesting. They questioned the ruling clerical establishment, asserting the right of individuals to make their own moral judgments on the basis of reason and their own individual conscience. I also think since then, those thoughts have been developed further. Innovative Islamic scholars have also explained that Sharia is not a monolithic Islamic system. Rather, there's fiqh, focusing on personal morality, and siyasa, which is focused on rulers serving the public good. Siyasa does not have its origins in Islamic scripture, but rather from broad good governance principles, with an emphasis on the public good. There was these two Georgetown academics, Sherazad Rahman and Hussein Askari, I'm sure you'll know, who developed an Islamicity index based on 113 Quranic injunctions pertaining to the public good, and correlated this with data sets from the UN Human Development Index, the World Bank, and other sources. And according to this Islamicity index, the top 10 most Islamic countries in the world are Ireland, Denmark, Luxembourg, Sweden, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Finland, and Norway. Muslim majority countries, by a contrast, fared poorly, with Saudi Arabia securing the 91st position, Qatar at 112, Morocco 120, Egypt 129, Iran 139, and Sudan 190. The bottom line is, I do believe that one can be both Muslim and democratic, and I'm actually more optimistic towards the future. And I should maybe also say, on a personal note, as a practicing Muslim myself, I think the book also reflected a very much of a personal journey in terms of how do I be Muslim and be part of this non-Muslim society in which I am in. And so whilst I tried to deal with it academically, it was also very much a personal journey. And with that, I say thank you.